You can look at me and you're like, he works for a school choice advocacy organization. Of course, he's going to come up with a study that says, hey, school choice is way more effective. I'm not asking you to trust me with this study. I am actually pointing you to some of the most rigorous research that has been done in both areas by top scholars in economics.
Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high-quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters.
Caitlin, I'm really excited about our guest today. Dr. Patrick Graff is a leading education researcher and one of my colleagues at the American Federation for Children, where he's a senior fellow. His latest research, which was just released, examines whether scaling private choice programs or increasing education spending delivers greater academic gains. That's something I know you care a lot about. It's something I care a lot about. So, Patrick, welcome to Quality Matters.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. So, all right, let's just start right off the top. Why don't you give us sort of the big finding? Your research is comparing the academic effects of two things. Sort of, on the one hand, increasing education spending and those competitive effects. On the other hand, scaling a private school choice program. So give us kind of top line. What did you look at? What did you find?
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways, this study began 15 years ago when I was a third grade teacher in the state of Florida. So I used to teach third grade at a Catholic school just outside of Tampa. And, there we had many kids in our school that were only able to attend because of the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship. And it was about a third of our school population at the time. So this was 2011, 2012. And at that time, the program was very limited. It was a small program for low-income families. Often you had to be coming from a failing public school only in order to transfer into the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship to have an opportunity to go to a private school. And at that time, I really thought about the program primarily as something that helped my kids, helped my families, right? These families who might have been going to our parish, to the church on Sundays, might not have otherwise had an opportunity to come to the school during the week if it weren't for this program. I think it was only later when I went back and I started doing research on these programs and also doing policy work that I realized, not everybody loves these programs as much as those families did. And the biggest thing that we hear is that a lot of families will say, hey, I think it's great that we are giving parents choice, but what about those families left behind in the public schools? What happens to those kids?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a real question. If you're a policymaker, you have a set amount of money, let's say it's $10 million, and you're thinking, let's start a scholarship program. Should we spend it for the scholarship program, which might grow over time? That might fill up quickly, and it's gonna be even more costly to the state than that initial 10 million. Or should we give that extra $10 million to the public schools? So this research study actually kind of looks at that in the state of Florida. And it's a little bit different than a lot of school choice studies, which often focus on, those kids that get the scholarship. How do they do as a result of getting that scholarship? This actually is not even focused on, let's say, the kids in my classroom. It's actually focused on the kids down the road in the local public school. So what happened to them as a result of this program receiving investment through tax credits and getting bigger over time? And what we found is kind of striking. The effects of the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship as it scaled up created competition in Florida. And this actually had benefits for public school students in higher competition areas that greatly outpaced what we might expect from some of the best school spending research that would tell you how much return on investment are you going to get for every dollar spent in the public school system. So I think this is kind of a counterintuitive finding for a lot of folks who think, school choice is kind of this either or issue, right? It's like either you do school choice or you fund the public schools adequately. And I think what I actually found is, Florida's done something kind of very interesting and dynamic with their education system in saying we can fund this school choice program. And actually, it has benefits not just for the kids who use it, but also the kids in public schools.
Yeah. Thank you.
Really quickly, I don't want to interrupt you, Shaka, if you had sort of a follow-up question to that, but I think that one of the neatest parts is what you just said, which is like it's counterintuitive. And as I was going through your research and your presentation and sort of learning more about the study itself, that was exactly my thinking, which I honestly I couldn't tell if I was sort of caught off guard that I didn't ever consider the alternative. Like when I look at all these school choice um, programs and the research around it, the data is very encouraging for the students that are the participators. And there's absolutely an entirely additional bucket of students and families. And what does, their education journey look like if, as we pursue sort of these choice options and these education freedom pathways? And you gave us that answer. Like you gave us a really, strong argument as to the fact that their education journeys are also benefiting. And sort of a reoccurring theme in my mind as you were talking and as I was reading was this notion of like, I'm going to botch the phrase, but like a high tide rises all ships. Like there is an opportunity and it is possible for people, kind of across the board to be elevated by this pursuit and by this effort. And so all that to say, I thought that the counter intuitiveness to the study was like the best part for me because it totally opened up my mind to a different way of thinking about it, a different group and population to be studied. And I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing. I mean, this to me, Patrick, it's one of those moments that we've probably all seen when we've watched a TED Talk where, at the opening, the speaker always says like, what if I told you? Right. This to me was kind of one of those moments where you went like, what if I told you that the most effective way to increase academic output, academic gains in the public school was this private choice program? And you go like, wait a minute, how does that work? Right. So can you talk to us like, obviously we are hosting this podcast. We are not policymakers, Caitlin and I, but if we were policymakers, like what is the thing that policymakers in your experience need to maybe better understand about funding, kind of the links and the relationship between funding and say additional days of learning? Like what did your research kind of indicate?
Yeah, so one of the studies that I rely upon for this report that I put together, so I call it a research synthesis. So, you can look at me and you're like, here's this guy who works for a school choice advocacy organization. Of course, he's going to come up with a study that says, hey, school choice is way more effective than spending money on public schools. I'm not asking you to trust me with this study. I am actually pointing you to two different high quality, some of the most rigorous research that has been done in both areas by top scholars in economics that are not me. So I'm showing you some findings from the two of these, and I'm hoping that people take a look and try to figure out what's going on. What is happening in Florida that's leading them to have these results? So I want to make that very clear too, because online when we posted this study, you can look at my calculations, you can look at my methods, and fully reproduce everything that I've done here. And basically, what I'm showing is that when you look at the school spending research, and this was done by Jackson and Makavicius, who published an article in 2024. It's called a meta-analysis. So they took together 31 studies that were some of the highest quality school spending studies that have been done on the effect of additional school spending on student outcomes. So here, this is the really bedrock of research that gets cited when folks say we need to spend more money or our schools are underfunded. And this research is the best example we have, the most recent best example we have that says, here's the return you're going to get on that when you spend more. So I'm using the best research from, if you will, the other side of this. And using
this
that
is
research
in the state of Florida.
So that is drawn from across the country. So those 31
nationwide.
studies, cool. Yeah, so that's nationwide. So those 31 studies are drawn from states across the country and basically looking at what is our average expected return. And, some are larger than others. Some were actually negative. There were cases where districts spent more money and actually got worse outcomes as a result. That's the minority of school spending studies. Most would say you spend more, you get a little bit more for that. But the question is, at what cost, right? So how much are you spending? And basically what they found was for every $1,000 per pupil per year, so that's per kid per year, you will get about an additional 6 days of learning for that $1,000 out of a 180-day school year. So it's definitely something. But if you start thinking about how many kids you have in your education system, $1,000 more per kid per year, when our national average is right around 20 grand already, so you could increase education funding. Let's say you increased it by 50% next year and moved every kid up from 20,000 to 30,000. That's an extra 60 days of learning, which is pretty significant, but at a massive, massive cost, right?
Right.
You're hitting somewhere close to $500 billion if you did that in every state. Right. So it's a huge cost for a relatively modest return. And so the question is, how do we design systems and what kinds of interventions within those systems are going to be the most effective for raising achievement, particularly at scale? So kind of at the level of a state, not just one school or one particular district. And my approach was actually found to be you can spend even less amount of money than that, but as this competitive effects kind of grow within Florida, it returned a lot more kind of through this more indirect method than kind of this direct spending method.
So obviously the podcast, like everybody who's listening knows, it's called Quality Matters. And so I'm curious to sort of pick your brain about the notion of quality and competition in the ways that you're describing. So for context, we had somebody on the podcast who was manufacturing socks. And one of the notes that he made was that before he did anything in this world, he bought a ton of different pairs, lived in them, tried them, and he learned from all of the different pairs what he did like, what he didn't like. That influenced the product he then created, which was a sock that never wears out. Like you can wear it indefinitely and it continues to do all the things socks are supposed to do. So this notion of competition fueled the quality of the product that he created because it gave him all this information. That's sort of the conclusion. And when I hear you talk about this study and this notion of competition and promoting school choice, creating lots of opportunity, lots of choices, it actually influences positively the learning environment that some of the public schools are operating in. Hopefully my parallel is understandable, but is that sort of what you're thinking too, that like the elements of quality instruction, quality learning environments that come when you have lots of different choices that's why the public schools are able to perform better. That's why they're incentivized to perform better, because there's other education environments coming up and offering different things, and there's new tactics and new instructional methods being used. Is that sort of the thinking here? And is that sort of, or maybe that's the reasoning? I guess that's my question to you. What does competition and quality sort of look like in this study and in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're asking a question about mechanisms, right? So you have this competitive effect, but actually like what's happening in schools or how are schools changing in response to this? I think that's a really good question because, the authors of the primary Florida study that I rely upon for this work, this research synthesis work, they also did studies and interviews of principals across the state during the study period in the early years of the voucher. And part of what they discovered there was that it wasn't just principals that responded by changing teacher working environments, upping their instructional game. They also started providing extra instruction, more instructional time to some of their lowest achieving students who were the ones eligible for the tax credit scholarship during that period of time, which is very interesting. But it was also districts that responded to this competitive pressure. Because for districts, every time a student doesn't enroll in a public school, there's some amount of funding that's following that student from the state. And so for them as operators, they're thinking, how do I make sure that our families want to stay and want to choose to be a part of the system as opposed to kind of taking this off ramp.
Right.
And if you look at the size of the program in the early years, it's really not a lot of kids, right? We're talking about 15,000 kids in the first year. It starts scaling up to, right, 25,000, 30,000 kids. This is in a state of 3.2 million public school students, right? That are, in those schools. But the fact was that there are a number of schools who felt a little bit of pain. They were like, we lost a couple kids. Interestingly, that actually reduces class sizes by a little bit, which we know also benefits kids.
Mhm.
But then it kind of perks you up. It's like, well, we actually need to be responsive to parent concerns. We need to be responsive to the educational needs.
Right.
And so there was really this swell of, we actually need to up our game a little bit in order to remain the option of choice for our families.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I heard a district superintendent where I live in the state where I live in Tennessee once talk about wanting all of his schools in his district to be schools of choice. Right? He said every school should be a school of choice. He said I want families to drop their kids off at our schools because they want to drop their kids off at our schools, not because they have to. And so in some ways there was this like mindset shift, Patrick, that I think you're kind of pointing us towards a little bit, like where if the operators start thinking, okay, we've got to just up our game so that people want to choose us, that's going to not only does it have the effect of attracting people or keeping people, but maybe the quality, to Caitlin's point, starts to tick up as well, which obviously seems like what we're going for. So one of the graphs that stood out to me in your report is this chart that shows that scaling this choice program in Florida was more than 11 times more effective than simply increasing school spending. So tell me if I've got this right, and you clean it up for our audience. But it seems to me then that's like just saying, all other things equal, we're getting way more bang for our buck if I'm a policymaker by spending money on this choice program than I am if I was just to put the equivalent amount of money into towards district spending. Do I have that about right?
No, that's exactly right. And I think the key here is really the 15-year span of scaling this program up. These were effects that really emerged, particularly in years like 7 to 15. If you kind of look at the growth of public school kids in high competition areas. So the way that the competitive effect studies are designed is that they look at kids in schools that are located in high competition areas. So this would be more densely populated, more private school options down the road versus those schools that are kind of in less dense areas where there's fewer options. So it's kind of less competition, and seeing over time kind of what happens to these kids. They're all growing in Florida, actually, but the high competition kids grow more. And so that difference between the high and the low is your kind of competitive effect, is the way that they're measuring it between high and low competition. And so basically, I took the overall cost of the program over these 15 years. So the cumulative cost, if you add up every year, was $2.8 billion in inflation adjusted terms to 2028. If you were to take this, wanted to achieve the same amount of learning, you would need to spend via the school spending approach $31.8 billion to achieve the same 120 days of additional learning that those high competition kids got after 15 years. So, I mean, it's a long time span. So I think that that's one important thing to keep in mind here is this is not like a quick turnaround. This is more of a system level intervention that plays out over time that's much more cost effective. So, what that breaks down to per public school kid, because I talked about that earlier with the school spending literature. So to spend that amount of money, so 2.84 billion, that would be the same as spending $127 every year on every high competition public school K through 12 kid. So it's like everybody gets $127 more. That's the Florida tax credit cost. In comparison, if you took the school spending approach for the same achievement gain, you'd have to be spending over $1,400 per kid per year over that whole 15 years to achieve the same 120 days. So that is a huge difference in total investment. Any one year seems like, oh yeah, we did a good job increasing education spending this year. But if you think about the cumulative cost of that to a state, I mean, you think about what is that nearly $30 billion difference? Like, what else could we be using that for?
Totally.
And there's a lot of other really effective educational interventions that you could also invest in. I think you should invest in. But the problem is a lot of those educational interventions, it's really hard to scale them to the size of a state. So I think that's another really compelling piece of what I found here is that, if you take tutoring, for example, you can take a really effective tutoring program for like a school or even a small school district. You try to take that even to the level of like a large district. It's very hard to keep costs down because you have to keep hiring tutors. Are they going to be effective? Often not once you start having to hire thousands of them. And so your effect sizes go down and your costs go up. With the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship, it was exactly the opposite. As the program got bigger, the effect sizes actually went up and the cost effectiveness improved even more. So the cost went down per unit of gain. So that I think is a very novel and I think interesting finding of kind of what happened in the Florida context.
So that was really helpful, and sort of hearing it in the Florida context, just like what you said, is very clarifying. Of course, we have people listening from all over, the country. From your perspective as the expert on this report, what are some, give us top 3 takeaways that other states or that people kind of at every level, there's lots of different types of people that need to be engaged in this sort of systemic approach. So what are the top 3-ish things that other states can either start doing to sort of replicate some of this work, or what are some things that other states can learn? Basically, how do we transfer all of this great information and research that was sort of exemplified in the Florida context to other places and to other people in different states?
Yeah, I think what the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship in Florida enabled was accountability on both ends of the spectrum. So you have kind of bottom up accountability in the forms of parents being able to pick where they would go with their family for their kids to go to school. And you also had a state driven accountability in terms of making kids open to attending these schools and having things like school grade policy, third grade retention in place over this period so that families had information on whether their schools were working or not. So, I mean, some of my policy takeaways for me are really, it's really important to provide families good information on education in their state, regardless of where they're going to school. So if that's a public school or a private school that's participating in a choice program, like families should have good information to make decisions. And then if you have choice available, they're going to use that information to make good decisions for their family. So it kind of approaches quality from both sides there. I think Florida was able to build out an accountability system that paired really well with this tax credit scholarship program.
Right.
And I think in other states, you just don't have some of that same pairing, right? You might have a lot of top down accountability, but not as much bottom up. And what ends up happening in that world is some of our lowest achieving students kind of just get left behind because the incentives are not necessarily there, or there aren't people as close as their parents paying attention that can make changes when they need to.
Yes, I love that one too.
One of the things I love about this conversation is that you both have classroom experience, and one of the things that's emerging from Caitlin's questions, but also from this report, Patrick, and your experience, is that this doesn't sound like it's like it's pitting two systems against one another. Which I think is just so important for us to remember, that families have often multiple kids who are going to different schools, and you might have one who's in a public charter school and one who's in the zone school and one who's in a private school. That was really my life for a school year, right? And you're trying to figure this out. Parents, I think, don't necessarily think about this in terms of a zero-sum system versus system. And it sounds like your report is also saying that policymakers ought not think about it that way, that you can, this is maybe really what you do when budgetary gravity exists. And you go, all right, turns out no state can just stroke a check and write write a check for $30 billion on an annual basis. That's just not a thing. So in the absence of that, what can we do? Turns out we actually do have an intervention that works and is going to benefit all kids, but we need some of these other factors: patience, accountability at both ends of the process, and then all kids do better.
No, that's absolutely right. And actually, I have another paper I'm working on with a colleague from the Fordham Institute. So hopefully we'll be talking about that in a couple months. But Florida, interestingly, is among a handful of states in the country where their public school student population has actually grown over the last 6 years, which is an anomaly. So we're actually facing a demographic cliff in terms of K-12 education. Most public school systems around the country are shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the states in which they are declining the most are some of these no-choice states. I highlight that a little bit towards the end of my study. So there's 18 states with no private school choice program. My native California is among them. Over the last 6 years, they've lost more than 5% of their K-12 enrollment, despite having no private school choice program. In contrast, Florida's K-12 population, despite having over 500,000 kids now in school choice programs and being the largest school choice state, their K-12 population in public schools has actually grown by almost a percentage point over the last 6 years. So it's a place where families want to raise kids. It's where they want to move to take advantage of these systems. And so, I think that there's a lot of myths that often are politically convenient in some ways to pit these families and groups against each other, rather than looking to places like Florida and saying, how can we build a dynamic system that serves all families?
I think that is such a powerful statistic. And I think that, as we wind down our time here, that's a perfect place to end us, because to me, what I take away from that statistic is twofold. One, you are not going to stop a parent's pursuit of looking for and trying to get a better education for their child. If there's not a program that supports it, that supports them financially, they're going to find a different way to do that. If they are not feeling, appropriately or adequately supported on behalf of their child, they will do something different. So we're seeing that with the 18 states that whose public school numbers are going down and don't have choice options. On the flip side, the second point that I think is so worth sort of wrapping up, and I'm so grateful to you, Patrick, for sharing this, is when you do sort of fan the flame, the expansiveness of sort of where that fire can go and sort of what it can cultivate and how powerful it can get, we're realizing far exceeds just the silo in which you're actually fanning the flame. And so I think that's really powerful too. And I'm so curious, and I'm excited, Shaka, to break this down a little bit further in our own conversation, like why is this happening, and pick your brain about some of those thoughts. But to wrap us up, Patrick, thank you for sharing this information with us, for sharing this information with our audience, and for taking the time to really build this powerful argument and case as to why it is that the work we're doing is important and impactful and supporting students and families.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad no one fell asleep during my research presentation here. So this is great.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick.
Good to be with you.
Awesome. Take care. All right, Shaka, another fantastic episode of Quality Matters. I thought that this conversation with Patrick about school choice competition and versus new education spending was fascinating. And I thought he shared so many really powerful anecdotes. One of the ones that I want to sort of hear your response to was this notion that it's not necessarily, spending versus choice. They're not on either sides of the equation. They don't have to be in competition with each other. They actually, as we learned, and as Patrick proved, they actually support each other. And there is a world, a strongly recorded and advocated world, where the pursuit and expansion of choice programs actually helps and benefits students in public schools without actually spending these billions and billions of dollars sort of frivolously in the public school world. So I thought that was really interesting. Of course, always for this idea of we don't need to be in competition and in argument with another side, but instead we can, inform ourselves on how we can work together and like really cohesively raise the educational experience for all students.
Yeah, for sure. It made me think of something from the healthcare setting a little bit. And we've had some folks on who talked to us a little bit about healthcare, but this made me think of it in a different way. I was thinking about some of the work that's done if you're concerned, and we should all be concerned with, let's say, health outcomes and mental health outcomes specifically of children, right? Of course, we want to know that kids are doing well. We want them to be happy and thriving. So it turns out one way to improve those outcomes for kids is to directly target and put resources towards the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out another way to do it is to target and put resources towards the parents,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what happens, like if mom and dad are stressed, kids feel that, kids
Right.
sense that, and vice versa, by the way, right?
Right.
And so, what if I told you that, if I told you that, hey, turns out it's 11 times cheaper to put resources towards the parents and actually still have the same or better outcomes for the kids, we would go like, yeah, let's do that.
Right.
That's a little bit similar where we go, hey, turns out by turning this, sort of knob over here, we can affect outcomes on the, on the other side of the county or kind of in nearby schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important thing, because in the case of that Patrick was talking about, the opposite's actually not always true, right? Meaning if you put all that money into a public school system, the outcomes for the kids in non-public schools don't necessarily increase, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any data on that. But we do in the other direction. And that's super important. And really meaningful. It makes me think about all the states that are now facing like budget challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's just reality. If you're a policymaker, you're going into a year and you're going, hey, the budgets are tight. There's not just billions of dollars just lying around that you can put towards education, even if we wanted to.
Right.
Right. So in a world where there are scarce resources, I think it just behooves us to know what the ROI is on these different strategies. So yeah, I'm super glad for that, for the work that he's doing.
I love the analogy of parents. If it was 11 times cheaper, wouldn't you just, improve the relationship, or you'd spend the money in the parent section and then you'd watch the children benefit. Similarly, when you were saying that, was the response I had sort of during our conversation with Patrick, which, why is that? Why, when you spend the money with the parents, and how do you spend the money on the parents? What changes in their relationship that produces this much more grounded, much more emotionally regulated, much more secure child, and therefore the child can have more success. So when I think about the conversation that we just had with Patrick, so much of my reflection includes pondering on, why is it that when you promote choice and create more education, freedom, and all of that, does this sort of separate bucket also really gain? Of course, I go to, again, this idea of like, okay, well, there's competition. Like there's this new incentive to retain students in the public school sector because there's more options for them to go. You have to up your game. You have to perform and offer a service that is at a minimum comparable to what else is being offered.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Well, you're going to at some point have to empower those public school teachers, the public school leaders, the public school districts, the public school,
the admin, just all that infrastructure. Yeah.
Yes. Everybody is going to feel this sense of responsibility, or needs to feel the sense of responsibility of performing, leveling up, raising the bar. And like inherently when I say that, it makes me excited because like what else do we want educators sort of doing? Like we want them to have agency and autonomy in insofar as they feel a personal investment or sense of responsibility to deliver better for kids. Like if everybody is feeling that way, we're going to be getting better results. And sort of what I understood Patrick sharing is that this approach kind of creates an environment where that that sense of agency, that sense of responsibility, that sense of investment is natural, and it does come about.
Caitlin, let me ask you something. I mean, one of the things obviously that Patrick's report has us thinking about is this relationship between outcome and spending,
Mm-hmm.
which I think at first blush makes a lot of sense to people. I mean, listen, I think money matters.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
that is probably another podcast that's out there. Ours is Quality Matters, but I'm sure Money Matters is a real podcast. It should be. And I believe it's true. I believe it's true in schools, whether they're public, non-public, whether you're homeschooling, whatever. But do you think that people just overestimate how much money matters?
Yes.
Right? Because you sort of hear people are like, well, why don't you just spend more on the existing system? Are they just overestimating it?
Okay, I might be just so cynical, but like answer me this. How it's so much easier to be like, I need more money from you,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
Than to say, I'm going to rethink how we deliver instruction to meet the needs of 24 individual students in this classroom.
Yes.
And that's going to return a different result. Or it's so much easier to say, well, if I had, $10 billion more, I could have had a better result, than to actually acknowledge to yourself, maybe I could have done something different in how I approached the support and differentiation for my 18 different students. Or maybe it was me that could have done something different as the school leader to have incentivized my teachers or have supported my teachers differently. Maybe they needed an opportunity to feel heard and validated, and I didn't give them that. But instead, I'm going to write an email that says I need more money.
Boy, okay, you're really, yeah, I think you're on something. I really was asking the question genuinely, and I'm just want to like double click what you said, because I think you're so right. It's much easier to blame money, or frankly, it's much easier to spend money than to change the culture in the school, right? So much easier. I remember, I mean, early on, we've had folks like Dr. Patrick Wolf, another Dr. Patrick, talked about that. Dr. Ashley Berner talked about the school culture piece. Like culture, that's hard. That dealing with that stuff is hard. Dealing with really differentiating for every student in your classroom, that's hard. It is. I think you're right. I think it's much easier, maybe even lazier, to sort of say, you know what, let's just spend 10% more. I also think when Patrick was talking, he was talking about some of the numbers, what those numbers look like when you're trying to scale something up across an entire state, and just how much money you need to spend, which again is just unrealistic. But when you think about it on a per pupil basis, sometimes the amount is really small, and there again, what it made me think of, and I don't know if my parents listen to this podcast, but if they do, I hope they're not offended by this. Mom, Dad, I don't mean to offend you, but I have relatives who on my birthday will still like write me a check or include some money in a birthday card. What I would say is it's the sentiment that counts, right? It's the thought that counts. Because I assure you, it's not like an envelope stuffed with $100 bills.
Right.
It's like a very, a modest amount, whatever. But how do you feel when you get that? You feel really good. You're like, oh, this is really great. Somebody just gave me, $20. But $20 across the whole year. I mean, we're adults with real jobs. It's very little. And I sometimes feel like folks in schools think the same way.
Okay.
Right. they get this little, they say, oh, we need more money. And so a district goes, all right, fine, you get this much more money. It actually has very little effect.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, because you're talking about billions of dollars that are spent. And so if you up that money, if you have a district like mine that spends $1 billion a year, and you up the per pupil amount by $50 per pupil, who cares?
Right.
It's nothing. It's nothing, right? I just think it is sentimental. It's psychological. It's the birthday card with the check in it.
Right.
But it's not going to be life changing, and it's not going to change lives for students.
I totally agree. It's not going to. And it does lead me to think about, like, well, then what would? And okay, well, we know that, that competition, but, giving teachers agency and autonomy, giving school leaders time and empowering them, exposing them to new ideas and creative solutions that's working in other places that could be working in their areas. Like, I would love to hear from our audience and the people listening, like, if they were given sort of a quote unquote dollar bill, and instead of the monetary value, they could put, this is what I'm going to give to this school district, or this is what I'm going to give. And it's going to be a new idea, or it's going to be a new way of thinking, or it's going to be a, here's unlimited time, like, we're getting creative here. This is, doesn't have to be realistic. Like, what would people be giving to actually change, move the needle? And the last part about this that I'm going to share is this idea of under low expectations for students and for teachers and for everybody related to education. I feel that strongly in this conversation. It applies to this conversation as well. Like, we are under expecting and under
challenging kids.
And what I think, though, is we're also under challenging schools, school leaders, districts. Like, we're saying to them, like, oh, what the reason you can't do this is because you don't have enough money. Right. Instead of sort of, again, equipping people to believe that they actually do have what they need in some capacity. I can already hear the cynics and the critics coming at me like, well, my whatever it is, like, all right, let's be realistic here. In most situations, you are certainly equipped to some extent to start creating change and to start creating improvements. We just have to be like, we have to remove our own roadblocks. And I do believe that more frequently than not, the roadblock isn't a lack of funding. It's funding going into frivolous places. It's systems that don't have, like Chad Auer said, systems that are about employing teachers, not about educating students. Okay, well, funding is going to reflect that.
Yep.
So I just love this. I love the counterintuitiveness that this study highlighted for us, which is that you can be promoting choice and elevating the public school experience at the same time. And I think that that's really powerful. And I hope that that's sort of one of the, I hope it gets the attention it deserves and sort of.
Yeah, me too. It's a really cool report. If I might, I mean, Patrick is a colleague, but he's done a lot of work on this. It's a gold standard level analysis, and I invite folks to take a look at it. One of the things that I'll note, and as we try to land this plane, is that that Florida tax credit scholarship, which is what this was primarily based on, one of the things he said is you got to have the long view. It took 15 years. And I will admit to getting really impatient, because we all know that a third grader, this is their only chance, right? The third grader, that 9-year-old or whatever, you're going to get this third grade year this one time.
Right.
You don't get to redo. You don't get a mulligan. Right. And so I know we've got to get it right. So I definitely feel the urgency. However, Patrick really took the long view and said, look over 15 years of this program, because it actually starts to gain more and more momentum as it goes. And so I think on the one hand, I want to caution folks to go, okay, we're not going to know if, quote, it works in 60 days or even a semester. So we have to have the long view. On the other hand, I am really encouraged that, there is a nationwide tax credit that rolls out in 2027. This education freedom tax credit rolls out, which means we're going to have not just Florida as an example, or Indiana, which has, a similar program. We have the potential to have 50 little, not just little, but 50 states worth of research environments,
Yeah.
ecosystems happening, these experiments that are happening around the country. And if we get even half the ROI that they've seen in Florida, that would be a game changer for millions of kids.
Just imagine all those 18 states whose public school attendance is decreasing.
Yeah, it's tanking.
But they don't have current choice programs. Like, again,
yeah,
you're not going to stop a parent from pursuing a better education for their kid and doing what they can with what they have to get that. You're just not. Now, equipping parents to be even more well-informed and better positioned to take on that journey.
Yeah, it's going to take work for sure.
Who knows what it looks like, but those parents know what lies on the other side of that. I really do believe that. And
yeah, tons of opportunity. Well, I'd love to know, for folks who are listening, and definitely we'll drop some links to Patrick's report in the show notes, but take a look at that. We want to know what strikes you about this. How have you seen sort of the money in your city, in your state, work or not work, right? Because we all know, let's be honest, that no one of us always spends money as wisely as we could. And as I think it was Milton Friedman who said, you're never as careful spending someone else's money as you would have been spending your own money. And so we've all seen instances where money did not get spent wisely by schools. Would love to know what some of those are. Maybe drop them in the links. But thanks again for another great conversation, Caitlin. This has been awesome.
I enjoyed it as always, and I'm grateful for these opportunities to explore these conversations more and break them down and hear what you have to say. So I look forward to the next one, Shaka.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
You too.